Lawmakers are pushing for a change to Wisconsin's missing child alert system after a 5-year-old boy was murdered in Milwaukee last week.
Democratic State Senator LaTanya Johnson says the Amber Alert system disqualifies too many missing children whose lives could be saved. This as 5-year-old Prince McCree was found dead in a dumpster after he was reported missing last week in Milwaukee. His case did not meet requirements to activate the state's Amber Alert system. Senator Johnson says this case literally hits close to home because she lives just a few doors down from the McCree family. In this first alert update, Emily Riley joins us live in the newsroom with the changes that legislators want to see happen. Emily.
Cammie, State Senator Johnson says the bill would most likely implement a system that mimics the Amber Alert, but works specifically for local districts in times of crisis. This isn't the first time people have pushed to change Wisconsin's Amber Alert system. You may recall a previous attempt to change it, driven by the death of 10-year-old Lily Peters, who was murdered in Chippewa Falls last year. A neighbor of the Peters family, Eric Henry, created a petition to change what constitutes an Amber Alert for a missing child after it was not activated for Lily's case.
There was no way of us to know what to even look for. There were so many people wanting to help, but we weren't given the opportunity. Not saying that it would have changed anything, but just the fact that you're a parent saying, I need help, and then you kind of just sitting.
Senator LaTanya Johnson in a similar situation last week when 5-year-old Prince McCree was reported missing, but his case also did not meet the requirements to activate an Amber Alert.
Prince lives about 5 houses from me on the next block. And so I had the opportunity to be with the family probably about an hour after they started searching for Prince. And the family was frustrated.
Currently, there's 3 criteria for an Amber Alert. The missing individual must be under the age of 18, in danger of serious bodily harm or death, and the Wisconsin Department of Justice needs information about the missing child as well as a suspect or suspect's vehicle.
That third qualification usually is what denies a lot of children from being able to gain access to the Amber Alert, which is unfortunate because in most cases, when you have a child that's missing, you don't know what the circumstances are. So you very seldomly have a suspect or a suspect description, to be honest. In the early stages, the police, they're still investigating all of that.
Senator Johnson tells me she's reaching out to possible co-sponsors and hopes to introduce the bill by January. That will leave a short window of time to have a hearing and pass both the Assembly and Senate. Bill and Cammie.